Good morning. Hemshech Ayin Beis, volume 2, volume 3. We're on page 1308, Aleph Shin Ches. And briefly, what we learned yesterday was really a fascinating and tremendous introduction to the whole concept of illuminating this dark world. And with all the talk that we've talked about Einoid, that's not just not just that the tzimtzum, the concealment, doesn't conceal and allows the divine light to shine through it. In other words, not just that the keli, the container, allows the oir to shine through it, like transparently, but also that the very keli itself, the very concealment itself, the night itself will shine, as he said. Not just the sun will shine then, but the night itself will shine with its unique light that we learned earlier comes from Helam Asmi. With all the talk about that, what does it really mean in practical, like talk about Chassidus applied practical terms?
Can everybody hear the Rabbi?
Excuse me?
No, I couldn't hear you for
the Rebbe Rashab is explain. Can everyone else hear me? Can everyone hear me? Yes or no?
Yeah, I hear you.
From the beginning?
I hear you.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I hear the beginning.
So the Rebbe Rashab is explaining that's why the Rebbe Rashab is now going back and explaining the basic principle. What does it mean to illuminate darkness? So he went back to the beginning, saying that in the neshama, the reason of the Brias Adam, Tachlis Brias Adam, the reason a person's created is in order, he puts Lahoyer es hacheshech de'elim hatachten, to illuminate the darkness of this lowest world, which is a double darkness, where we, on its own, without any effort, what we perceive and what we experience, as he puts it, is the gashmis v'chumis se'elam, is the physical and the crassness or coarseness of this world. Balakus, and the godliness within, is not perceived and revealed at all. And he goes on to explain at length on pages 1307 and 1308, as we discussed yesterday, how this comes to be, that even though it's true that God is the force, the driving force and energy behind everything, yet it's concealed. So though when a person contemplates, they'll come to understand that it's a divine force within it, and there's a koyach ein sof that gives the consistency and the unwavering consistency of existence, being able something that is mortal and limited to be able to be strong without any shift or change, and that whole routine of nature, and yet it's all concealed and submerged, like the words he put it, that comes to mishema ayin umaymik bezeh, but someone who delves and immerses themselves in it and thinks about it. But if you don't, aval bestam, meaning in a regular situation without any effort, ein alakus nira v'nigla klal, godliness is not at all perceived or revealed. And that's due to the fact because the earth was concealed through the tzimtzumim, the many tzimtzumim. God created the concealments and the diminishments, and especially this lowest of world, and especially klippus and sitra achra, as he explained on top of page 1308. And all that is really began to emerge after the Chet Eitz, because before that there was still an element of awareness, like he said. So he said there was still nir elakus, and they were and the creation recognized the godliness that drives it and the engine behind it. But after the Chet Eitz, that's when the darkness intensified, where what dominates right now, what is perceived and experienced, is the existence and the yesh of this world, not the godliness within it. That's all the definition of existence. But then comes Valzehu Brias Adam, the next paragraph on 1308, and that's why the human being was put and created and put in this world, in order to illuminate this darkness and to actually reveal the truth, which is concealed within, like Tovu B'Yamsuf, like he said, nature. The nature that even though nature is divine, but it's concealed. So the job is that through revealing the Nafshi Elikis, the light of the divine soul, below that illuminates the world, the person and the world, to experience and perceive the divine that's really lying within, even though on its own, it's concealed and dark. And that's the purpose. Then the Rebbe Rashab continued. Next thing we learned was that houses the nefesh alikis itself is mislabish. It doesn't just do it from a distance. The nefesh alikis encloses itself to the point that it gets completely manifest, and even and like you said, tfisa, meaning it's grasped and held onto. It's not, as I said, an outside experience. It's tfisa mamish by nefesh abamis. The nefesh alikis enters the animal soul. The divine soul enters the animal soul to a point where it's completely taken by it, completely involved and engaged with it, and to the point that the nefesh abamis can actually cause that the divine soul and its faculties should be concealed due to that fact. Because if the nefesh alikis, the divine soul, was more or less removed or apart, then it remains outside, more makif. But we see that it could actually impact the divine soul is completely within. That's why the animal soul can impact it so much. Like he said, when there's an intensification of the crassness of the animal soul, the faculties of the divine soul get concealed. But however, but when a person chooses to reveal the divine soul through his aveda b'tfilah, by what? Through the awakening of his love and his reverence for God, which comes after contemplation, which we're now in the middle of learning. So first I'll go over what we've learned so far about this contemplation. Then the divine soul radiates and shines and illuminates the animal soul and the world, which is shrouded in the darkness that conceals the divine within it. That's what he's leading to. So he started with who kashem is bainus. So what do we contemplate on to awaken this love and reverence? Ava v'yira. What is the contemplation? That everything in this world is created and is sustained and energized from the power of the divine that creates and energizes it. Then he adds, it's not enough just to have faith. You could say, you know what, the divine soul has faith, believes it. Every Jew, he says, that even though every Jew believes this with complete faith in the fact that the world was created by God, chidush ha'olam, that the world is not self-made entity, but it was created by God. But that's not a gilead. Faith is makif. Faith can be concealed. Even though a person has faith, you could see that he could have his gabrus ha'cheshach. You could see the darkness can be intensified to the point that a ganav, before he goes to steal, a thief, he prays to God to succeed. How is that possible? Even though he believes in God's bichelis, in God's capacity, in God's hashgacha, divine providence, nevertheless, he's behaving exactly contrary, defying God, because it's not revealed. It's Chassidus calls makif. He doesn't say the word makif here, but in other places he says that. That's why it's not enough just plain faith, the natural faith of a Jewish soul, of a Jew, but rather you need to have you have to have actually a cognitive contemplation, a logical and rational contemplation and his bonus. But hasaga, an understanding in the compelling case that his mind understands, then it's integrated. Not just the faith, that he actually has to understand that nothing can create itself. And therefore, when we see, I'm reading from the middle of the page. We read it already, but I'm gonna go from here. You need to have not just faith, but also hasaga sichlis, a cognitive, a rational understanding. In the compelling case, achrachis means that it's mukhrach to say, that you must say. It's a compelling case to say. Achrachis is more than compelling. It means an absolute necessity to say. And the contemplation, that there's no thing that creates itself. There's nothing in existence that can create itself. Therefore, but see is yesh, when we see an existing entity of a yesh, behechlich, we have to say sheyes chadash, that it came from somewhere, that it's a novel new thing that excuse me, Sheyischadish. That it wasn't here all the time. Something exists, something had to make, because nothing creates itself. Ki yesh mi yesh adein shiur, because to say that something comes from another thing, one yesh comes from another. Like I said, a tree comes from a seed that came from a previous tree. Adein shiur, with ad infinitum, without any limit, hu sheker muchlat, is an utter falsity. Like the Rambam writes in the Guide for the Perplexed in his introductions. So sheker muchlat, because nothing can go forever like that. And therefore, then when you find the Metzias Yesh, an existing entity, you have to say that it was preceded by not being there. That's heder means. Kodma heder is an expression that it first wasn't there before it was there. And from a state of not being, it came into a state of being. I'm sorry. And now here's where we stopped. So I'm going to continue reading from here. So he says, and due to the fact that it's something new, moving, if something put it here, like if you see a human being, you know the parents gave birth to this human being. No one creates themselves. You see a tree, you know there was a tree before it. And you can't say that it goes forever, because at some point, you know, who put the first tree there? So therefore, when it's seen as chadish, memela move on, then it's automatically understood that its existence does not come from itself. The expression used in the Geras HaKedesh on atzmus only. Because when you say something came from itself, something created itself, or something mitzius comes from within itself, not from a source outside of it that preceded it, that's a state that was no state of not being. Mitzius means it's always been there, because it itself it compels its reality compels that it has to be there. Something that is nischadish, however, is not did not create itself. Therefore, you have to say there was a state, a time that it didn't exist. Whereas mitzius matzmusei shaloi kod ma'heder, who shaloi kod ma'heder, v'hu mechuyev hamitzius, and it must exist. It's a reality that must exist. There's no tree, there's no animal, there's no human being, there's nothing in physical existence or spiritual existence for that matter that must exist. Everything was put here by something before it, that preceded it. So you can't call it mitzius matzmusei. You could say it's a nischadish, it's a mitzius nischadish, something that's new. That means that preceding it didn't exist. And only a mitzius matzmusei lo kod mo'ehed. As he says here. Vayesh, the yesh, however, the physical entity, or yesh, the entity that exists, the substance we're talking about, this existing entity, being that it was preceded by a state of not being, and now became something that was not there before, chidush. This contemplation leads you to understand this is coming from a divine power that actually created it, that made it come into being. The creator that created machadish, that gave it that how would you say machadish, that created it anew, as a new entity. And this divine power, this is all part of the hasaga sichlis, not just faith. The contemplation by understanding that existence cannot have created itself. And this koyach haliki, this divine power, who tamid boy, is forever, is perpetual within the creation. Because if this divine power would be removed even for 1 second, that entity would revert back to nothingness. In other words, being that it doesn't have to exist, so the one that wants it to exist has to keep wanting it all the time, or else it'll just revert back to ayin, to the heder that it was not before it became. Like we say every day in davening, that he renews with his kindness, his goodness, every day, perpetually, tamid, ma'aseh bereishis, the creation of existence. So it's a mechadish betuve, kol yom tamid. Chassidus in other places says, yom kol yom, lav dafka, means every second. So kol yom just means constantly. So now he's going back to this contemplation that comes from the divine soul. Remember, if you don't contemplate on this, then the darkness dominates. The only way to counter the darkness that conceals the divine is by using our minds to understand that there has to be a divine force that's within and hidden within existence. So then he says now, when a person contemplates and immerses his das, which means he connects, he attaches himself to this idea, that creates a vitality within him. Remember, Amunah is more of a static state. Amunah is not, it doesn't necessarily energize the person. It's just there. That's why a person could have Amunah and still defy and do against God. Here, the contemplation and the awareness, especially when he really immerses himself, is yesh lechayis b'zeh. He has a vitality and energy within it. Ebakumta chayis in them. In Yiddish, the Rebbe Rashab emphasizes, he receives a chayis. A chayis means a passion, excitement. It's all correct words. He becomes electrified by it. Another word you can use. And this is chayis aliki that radiates in the soul. If a person doesn't contemplate, so the soul, the divine soul, is filled with divine energy, but it's dormant. When he contemplates, what he's doing, he's awakening the chayis aliki, amer nafshe, this chayis aliki, this divine passion or divine excitement that is coming from this contemplation, amer nafshe, that radiates in his nefesh. And when a person is in that state, he continues. The way the Rebbe Rashab writes the next line is Hagashmi Gufe. Below they say it probably should be the reverse order. And this causes Vigam and addition. And also what happens is that the Gufe Hagashmi, his physical body, Hagashmi Gufe. Yeah, most likely Gufe Hagashmi. His physical body, Einay Nitfis Etzlei Begeshem Kol Kach. When a person is this state of awareness and consciousness, a divine consciousness that is now radiating that's coming from his mind and radiating within him and enlivening him and energizing him, he's excited about this. That also causes that his physical body does not matter that much to him. Its physicality is not so vital, you can say. So it's like the physicality he gets somewhat freed from the physical control of his life when the divine soul is not revealed. Like we see, like you said earlier, that when a person is not contemplating, what happens is, then what controls our lives? Our physicality, our physical beings, our bodies, our animal souls, and whatever temptations or desires that we're interested in. This behavior, contemplation and awakening counters that and causes that also the Gufi Agashmi Eina Nitfis Etzlei Begeshem Kol Kach. Doesn't let's say he's hungry, he's not so obsessed with his hunger, not so obsessed with other physical needs. But he's saying in general, the body is not that critical. Kol Kach, he says, not that much. Kiroya by Inyan Eliki. Because with this contemplation, he sees within it the inyan eliki, the divine nature or the divine energy that's sustaining the body. Ukamoshin is bar le'il, as was discussed earlier, explained earlier, in the Maimer Dibra Maskol, the Eilish Shmeis. So below they say that's in volume 2, page 814. The Rebbe Rashab is now going to continue in this contemplation. more details of how one basically radiates the darkness of our own personal lives and the world through contemplating with the divine soul on the godliness within. And he contemplates b'hafloas. Till now, we spoke about the contemplation and the understanding and comprehension of the very fact that existence cannot create itself, and it has to have a creator. And all that awakens and stimulates his excitement about it. Now he's saying he also contemplates, and he contemplates on the hafloas, on the very wonder, the grandeur, and awesome nature of this creation. So in other words, now he's talking about the details, not just the general idea that existence has to have a creator, and therefore there's a divine force within everything, but look at the way he did it, the way God created haflos, that it's not done from a distance. This creation is in a form that the power of the creator within the creation, the power of the producer within the production. God didn't just stay removed and created existence. He invested his very power, like he said, that the power is invested in it. When we, for example, throw a stone, there's no way we can stand from a distance and say, tell the stone to fly. We have to take the stone and throw it. Same thing when you want to write something, you want to eat something, you want to do anything, you need to be mislabish your koyach hapoel benifl. But God could have done it in a different way, but he didn't do it that way. He put his energy inside, the producer invested himself inside creation in the same way that we do. However, we don't create. That's the distinction. Here is a form of creation. Which is a wondrous, it's a paradox. If God stayed concealed from a distance, okay, you're saying that he's investing himself, literally, every detail of existence has God's divine power invested in it, in detail, and at the same time, it's in a state of concealment, where the nivra doesn't feel, so it's like removed from the creation. There's no way that you could throw a stone and not someone recognize that the stone is being thrown by you. And here, God is putting his energy in, but at the same time, God has also the power to conceal the very fact that he's creating it and sustaining it, to the point that it's nivdal ma nivra, even though it's in there. The energy is in there, and yet it's concealed to the point, we're talking before the contemplation. That the contemplation is teaching, is also contemplating on this element. Like he writes there in the Dibra Maschel, in the Maimer, I'm assuming he means Ve'ele Shmois. Shazeu dover v'fuche. This is a this is a paradox. It's diametric opposites. Dover v'fuche means it's there, so something, and it's opposite. Is it in there or is it not in there? Is the divine energy within existence or is it not within existence? And here we're saying both. It's within, but it's in our perception, it's as if it's not there. That's all part of the contemplation of the Nefesh Elokis. And then he continues in the contemplation. So far he's talked about the very creation of something has to come from, it can't create itself, it has to come from a creator. Now he's talking about the hafla of Isavus, that is done in this paradoxical fashion, which is also a divine wonder. It tells us more, reveals more about the divine power to be able to create such a paradox. And then he says, U'b'gedulas Hashem. And the contemplation is also in the greatness of God. In the creation and the bringing into being of the worlds, the multitude of creations, and also their qualitative, their size, the immense size of the creations. Like we say, Marabu Masach Hashem or Gadlu Masach. So Rabu is simple multitude. How many species are there? How many stars are there? And then look at some of the creations, their magnitude in their size and their quality. Like we say, how many are the actions, the creations of God, and how great are the creations of God. God with the greatness, that could be size, it could be volume, it could be quality. From all this contemplation of the divine soul during davening, like he said at the beginning, Nasa hispilus hanefesh. Through all of this, it becomes what is derived from this. What this results in is a spilus hanefesh, an excitement of the soul, in a state of yearning or pining or longing, and the state of love to godliness. Because when you really think about it, that the existence we value so much is just a product of a producer. So as much as we value this existence, the producer, and you recognize the producer and his awesome way of how he creates, and also in the gadlus habayra, in the ribui, in the quantity and quality of creation, all this brings an excitement, a spilus, excitement, stimulation, to the point of a love to godliness. If you love this world, you definitely love the producer of this world. Ubefrat, and specifically, kashem is bein and b'chayis aliki. So he's bringing another part of the contemplation, a specific detail here, that when you contemplate on chayis aliki shebe'elamis, the divine vitality or the divine energy within the world, within existence, umay megdaite, and he immerses, we said before, delves in a deep way, deeply immerses his das. So he connects with it, Chassidus, his attachment. One second. In the manner that this energy and vitality I'm just thinking of how the song of this sentence should be read. Okay, I think it goes like this. I'm not sure where the second half of the phrase goes, but basically he wants to say that when a person does that, so through this, the Eir Eliki in his nefesh radiates within him, and it's in a form of closeness, dveikus ba'Eir Eliki, and a form of attachment in this Eir Eliki, and he very strongly desires in this godliness. I understand the content. I'm just trying to read the sentence how it's supposed to be phrased. What he's saying is that in addition to what he said before, that kol zeh nasa spilus, that when a person contemplates on three things, he said, on the fact that nothing creates itself, and therefore there's the divine force, the creator that created it. Number two, that the way is koyach hapoel benifel, it's in a very wondrous, awesome, paradoxical fashion, that it's in there, and at the same time it seems removed. And number three, that the marabu amagadlu, the sheer multitude, volume, and greatness of creations. So now he's saying, when he thinks of the chayes aliki, how that it sounds very much like the koyach hapoel benifel that he said earlier, but I'm not positive about that. That be'efen eir chayes. So then it's not just he's thinking about God is creating all of this, but that it's close to him. That this godliness is basically sustaining and energizing him. So that means that's in a state of closeness. Till now, he didn't speak about how it's part of who we are. He was just saying God creates everything, and he creates it in a way that's invested in it, but it also seems removed, feels removed, and as well as but now he's adding that the Eifen HaChayes Aliki, the manner, how the Chayes Aliki is within, and he concentrates on the point, the way it radiates within him, the Nafshe, and it's close to him. and a state of dveikus. So it's not just a lakus in the abstract. It's all attached and close to him. So v'reitzim eid belakus. And therefore desires, very much desires this lakus because it's so close to him. The kol zeh poil hachlishes by nefesh habamis. All this affects a weakness in the animal soul. It weakens the whole of the animal soul. Next page, 1309. That the animal soul should not desire its physical and coarse matters, and it distances itself from them. All this is what the divine soul is affecting, because it's so radiating and energizing the person. It affects the animal soul that the divine soul is manifesting. Okay. Ubefrat, and specifically, I'm going to stop soon and we'll take questions if there are any. Ubefrat, and specifically, im ha'izbanusi gamba seichel hativi. Now he's adding another thing. Till now, we're talking about the contemplation of the divine soul. But specifically, if the contemplation is also on the natural soul, in other words, he's also using the seichel of the nefesh habamis, of the TV. Till now, you could have said, you know what, this is the divine part within us that recognizes these divine elements. But especially if it's also that also the animal soul understands and comprehends this divine concept. That causes even more bittul, is what he wants to say. This causes even more sublimation in the animal soul. That it doesn't have any desire in the crass or coarse matters. The reitzebelikus, and he desires in godliness. He desires godliness. I'm going to finish till the end of the paragraph. V'chein ha'izbananus belikus sheba b'bchinas islapshus ba'olam, and there's also the contemplation in the godliness that comes manifest within the world. Some warning here. Just a warning. They're looking for somebody that did a shooting yesterday at the subway. Okay, all the phones are ringing. So now he's going further, that there's another part of the contemplation where you contemplate how God manifests within the world. This too, you can also is also fitting to have comprehension. The mipsari erzel leka, that from my flesh I behold God. The kamoisha oda margish nafshe asher b'teichei, just as a person feels the spirit or soul within him, even though he doesn't understand the personality of the soul, but its existence he knows, because you see, you're alive. So it means you know the existence of an energy within you. And he knows and feels the way it manifests within you. It's the way it exists, because it energizes you, even though you don't know the mahus. Mahus is its personality, but the mitzias you do know, and also the way that mitzias manifests. He feels within his spirit, within his soul, he feels energy, vitality. And the light that's within that energy, which means the light of the spirit that radiates within him. The gam suma, even a blind person who never saw light in his entire life, in all his days, he still knows the existence of a light, not as a light that you see with your eyes, but as an energy force and a vitality that radiates in his nefesh. It's an interesting example. In other words, even though the summa cannot see actual light, but he can feel an energy which is a form of light that radiates within him. Like, for example, when a person has a concept, a flash of an idea, which is a form of a Gilead. So even though you may not know where that flash is coming from, you definitely don't know its personality, its mahus, but you definitely sense something shining within you. So even someone who may be blind to the deeper understanding of godliness, of the neshama, but he knows that there's an energy within him. Just like we know an idea is flashed inside your mind. Now, he doesn't seem to, there's something strange here. Now they made a new paragraph. And the truth is, the Rebbe Rashab began with Bechinas Istapshus, but Elam Sebezeh. The Kamoisha Adam, he didn't conclude the sentence. I'm assuming it comes in the next paragraph, and therefore they misunderstood and they made a new paragraph. But basically, if I can speculate, the end of the sentence would be, so just as a person knows there's a chayis within him, we also know there's a chayis within the Elamus. Just like there's a saga in knowing the vitality and life force within us, even though not the mahuz, but the mitzias. So even though we may be blind to the mahuz, but we know the mitzias, same thing, there's the force of divine within existence. Now, what is he adding now? I would say we have to read further the next section. But since they did make a new paragraph here, I'm almost ready to say that it should not be a new paragraph because there's no conclusion to the kamoi. And I have to see. Just give me a second. Let me just see something. Okay. Yeah. He does continue and he goes back to the same type of contemplation on the worlds. So I don't know if this new paragraph really makes sense where they put it here. I would say no, but I don't want to jump to conclusion until we actually read it. But since the paragraph does end here, at least technically, I'm happy to stop here. But I would probably have made the new paragraph. That sounds more of a better place. But I think they're going with the commas and the periods that the Rebbe Rashab places, and that guided them a bit. So it's true, it's better to start a paragraph after a period than after a comma, but the concept seems to be really more of the new subject matter. But regardless, just to sum up, what the Rebbe Rashab has been doing here is giving us the language and the formula for the contemplation that counters the darkness of the animal soul and this world by introducing the divine concept, the divine energy that creates and sustains and gives and vivifies existence, as he spoke about it in many different details. And all that creates a force that dominates in the person, which in turn will weaken the darkness and the desires of the physical and crass matters of this world, of the animal soul. And he also included the contemplation of the animal soul itself should also understand this, not just the divine soul, but also the animal soul. So I'm going to stop here if there are any questions. I think it's pretty clear, but still, you never know.
I had a very, very small question. I mean, this is probably just even a matter of opinion, your personal opinion, but since no one else is asking a question, I'll ask. The bottom of page 108, from these contemplations, the fourth line, Shemikoza Nasa, Hispilus Hanefesh, Bechinas Rotsu, Bechinas Avalel Kus. It said all these contemplations bring him, basically to a love of godliness. I would have thought that he would have used the word yira. All these things, you'd see how powerful God is, that, all of existence turns on God's constant decision to make it be so, that would inspire fear or awe, not necessarily fear, but awe. I think fear too. Like, oh my gosh, like in snap of a finger, I could be blotted out. That doesn't exactly incite love; it incites fear. Yeah.
Well, this is a basic question, not about Ayin Beis. This is all over Chassidus. Talk about. I think it really deserves its own class on what is love and what is reverence. The two words I would use, starting from Tanya chapter 3, where he talks about in the first place about a person's contemplation and the love and there actually reverses the order. Sometimes he says first Ava, then Yira, sometimes first Yira, then Ava. And here too, if you look at the beginning of the subject matter, he began by saying Yisodus Ava v'Yira, which is both love and reverence. And the fact of the matter is it does both. And it's not, it's all over Chassidus. On one hand, when you contemplate on God's greatness, you want to be close to this thing. You want closeness. The more you appreciate God and God's sustenance of your life, you want to be close and you want to connect to it. Just like you love things in this world because you find them relevant, if you realize that the relevance of all of existence is only a product of the producer, it creates a tremendous desire to be close and love this thing. This is what real love is. You love something when you understand its value. There's another side which brings reverence, which is really reverence is about how God is beyond us. The idea of fear and the trembling is not relevant here altogether. That's usually not what's good. Here we're talking about both our deep experience. We're not talking about fear of punishment or fear of anything. You're talking about either reverence or love. So either way, it's basically every time you contemplate on God, they can bring to these two. They either bring to both of them or to one or the other. You have to really learn Tanya chapter 3 and also later in chapters 40 and on, where he starts talking a lot about Ava and Yira. So it's really a big sugya, a big topic in Chassidus, that just two different ways that we, that when contemplation. The Rambam also says it. How does a person come to the love? This is the Rambam in Hilchos Deis. He says, how does a person come to love and reverence of God? She is bainim b'gdulase, when he contemplates on the greatness of creation and so on. That's in the language of halacha of the Rambam. So this is common, two different results of a true contemplation of something that is, in this case, divine. And that's the story. And
great. Thanks
aspects.
for commenting. Thank you for commenting. Shlomo, are you going to, if you're going to talk, great. Otherwise, your phone's open. The mic is making noise. Yeah. Sorry. Thank you, Rabbi Jacobson.
You said before about that everything which is a mechudash must have an end. How about the sun?
And a beginning. Okay. 1 second. Mechudash means it has to have a beginning. An end is obvious, but also a beginning.
Okay. Okay, that's the answer.
Okay. So if that's the case, I will get back to the breaking of the paragraph. Once we learn inside, I want to just see how it flows. I mean, so far the flow has been different levels of contemplation, all the way to what he said now. And now he went, and he said, and he hasn't yet concluded that kamoi always has an end to the end, just as a person feels in his nefesh. And even a blind person feels that. He has yet, you wanted him to say, kamoi kain, same thing, we feel and understand the energy within existence. Like it says, mana shama mamala saguf, kacha kodesh baruch hu mamala sa'elam. There's an expression. Just like the soul fills the body and energizes, the God fills the world and energizes it. That's what I'm assuming. Somewhere he's going to say that kamoi kain. Just pointing that out, but I haven't seen it yet. I think it comes later in the bottom of the page more, but we'll learn it inside. I just wanted to tell you that the flow here still needs clarification, but I think when we learn it, we'll get that clarity. But the bottom line is to remember all this is coming to explain illuminating the darkness. And you'll see on page 1310, if you look ahead, that he's going to say it's not enough just to illuminate the darkness, but also we need to transform the darkness. So he's going to go back to the theme of Ayin Beis. But to understand it well, he's giving us now a lot of good oisius And thank God that the Rebbe Rashab is not just relying that we would figure it out. He's actually defining and very clearly spelling out what does it mean to bring light into a dark world, to recognize godliness when godliness is so deeply concealed. I think it's if you want to mark down fundamental section to review many times in the future, I want to refer people to, I would say page 1307 and 1308 are very Yesodus Dika piece in understanding where you see the Rebbe, the Chassidus itself describes the purpose of why we're here in this world, to illuminate darkness. Something we know and we hear all the time, but here is actually one of the places that actually spells it out in pretty detailed way. So I think it's a very good place to make a bookmark to keep in mind this section. It's going to help also understand the Ayin Beis theme much better. So we'll stop here. We're stopping here at the top of page, then the paragraph that ends on page 1309. As I said, I questioned that ending, but it's there, so it's just a marker. And are there any other questions? If not, I'm going to stop the recording here, and we'll continue tomorrow. We'll have a class tomorrow.